Welcome to another episode of Things You Didn't Know About the Holocaust. I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller, and my guest today is Robin Black. Now, she's the author of The Journey of a Hidden Child, and she did extensive research into the Holocaust in Belgium, which is what we're going to talk about today, to unravel the true story of the hidden child, Harry Pila, right? Harry Pila? Okay.
Yes.
So I just want to say this little thing that I learned during my research. So, in case no one remembers, Belgium is between the Netherlands and France. And whereas they both declared neutrality in World War One, the Germans in World War One occupied Belgium, but did not occupy the Netherlands. Whereas in World War II, they both declared neutrality again. And this time, the Germans occupied both, because I know people sometimes get that confused. And I will tell you one little anecdote. Many years ago, I was sitting next to two young men at a conference, and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" And they said, "Belgium." Pause. The country that's invaded by everyone over hundreds of years or something. Okay, so now let's start with before the war. Tell us about Harry before the war.
Okay. Harry's parents before the war, um, what he was told, because Harry came to me knowing very little about his parents. He didn't know that he knew very little, but the bit he'd been told by his mother was not true. So he came to me, and his story was that his mother was Polish. Her sister was living in Belgium, and she came to visit her sister in 1937, fell in love with the owner of the store where her sister worked as a seamstress. And his name was Serge de Russ, and he was Catholic. And he was from a French Catholic family, originally from Russia, and that's why the name was de Russ. And they fell madly in love and got married in 37, and she stayed in Belgium. And that was the story that I was given. And his mother, they were in Belgium. They were working for the resistance. She had an unplanned pregnancy because it was during the war, and she was Jewish, and gave birth to a child in March of 1941. Not a great time to have a child that was half Jewish. Um, and they were both, his parents were both working in the resistance, which was very strong in Belgium. And his parents made the decision when he was 6 weeks old to give him to their Gentile best friends for safekeeping, since they were in the resistance, and she was Jewish. And that's what they did. So he became a hidden child. He was like hidden in plain sight with this Belgian Gentile couple in Brussels.
Okay, so now you said what his mother told him wasn't correct. So what's the real story?
Okay, the real story is, so far, so I started researching this and was getting nowhere because I didn't have his father's real name. I didn't have his father's real provenance. And if this was during, I had a young child at home. I always did my research at the Holocaust Museum in DC. When I finally got there, and I was telling Harry, I just don't think I'm going to get enough research for a book. I'll find out what I can, but it's not going to be enough for a book. And when I finally was able to get to the Holocaust Museum, I walked the library that was there for research. I walked in and I said, I'm doing research on behalf of a Belgian hidden child. And within minutes, from a book that they handed me, which I will tell you about, I saw a picture of his father in the book, picture of his mother, the real name of his father, the birthplace of his father, his birth date, and the fact that he was a Polish Jew. So it was a lot of information that came at me. And once I had his father's true identity, the research just flowed. I mean, just one thing led to another, led to another. And I was able to get a complete picture of both of his parents, who incidentally had met in Poland, had married in a synagogue in Poland.
Wait, which city?
They were married. Oh, you're doing this to me. That's like the one thing I didn't put in my notes. I think they were married in Petrikov or Piot P
Okay.
I spell it more than I can say it. But they were from
But where
uh
and when were they married though?
they were married in I believe 1929 or 1931.
Oh, so much earlier than the story
So
begins.
much earlier, so much earlier. And let me say again, in a synagogue. So, and he was Polish. Yeah, he was a Polish Jew.
And she,
So,
but she was also a Polish Jew.
yes. And that was never like he always knew she was,
Okay.
yeah, he always knew she was Jewish. Did not know his father's real name was Shopsha, which is a very Yiddish name, very Jewish, and not a common one either. Szapsa, Shopsha Russ. So the last name was kind of right. I don't know where they got the surge. And in Belgium, they were assimilated Jews, and he went by the name Charles.
It'd
So,
be really confusing. Okay.
yes,
Okay. And now where in Belgium are they at this point?
they are in Brussels. They give birth to this child. They're living in Brussels. The people that hid Harry or took care of him, he refers to them as his war parents. They were also in Brussels. But what Rosa, his mother, and Charles did not realize when they placed Harry with the De Cranes, that was their name, Gerard and Germaine, was that not only were they in the resistance with Rosa and Charles, but they were spying on behalf of the British by pretending to be Nazi sympathizers and regularly hosting these soirees with Nazis in their home, with lots of liquor that was given to them by the British. And the Nazis were spilling. And when they would spill things that were really useful, Gerard would go down into the basement after the party was over, where he had a transmitter hidden in his coal cellar, and he would transmit the secrets back to the British. Extremely dangerous because this baby was being bounced on Nazi knees regularly. They hid him, they flaunted him, but they didn't have him. He wasn't a him. They made the decisions, brilliant decision, from the time that they got the baby, got Harry, whose name was Jean-Pierre. They gave him a Christian sounding name when he was born because he was born during the war. He was born with a huge head of hair that just grew like a chia pet. They grew Harry's hair long. They dressed Harry in girls' clothing, baby girl clothing, very feminine, so that there wouldn't be the chance that as Harry was getting a little bit older and looking more Semitic, that someone would say, I think this kid's a Jew. Pull down his pants. Nobody's going to ask to pull down a Jewish female's pants to see
Wait,
if they're circumcised.
you skipped a point. They made the decision though, even though they were assimilated, they gave him a bris. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Yes. He was circumcised. He was circumcised. So that's proof that he's Jewish. They shouldn't have. You're right. Like, I don't know why they did. That would have been really smart to just kind of put that off.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never even thought of that. Like, why? I never considered, like, why did they do that?
Right.
But
But
they
the
did.
war's been already been going on.
Yes.
Belgium's
Great
already
point.
right, right, right. He
Great
was
point.
born in wait.
Yes. So the Decranes,
Tell us again his birth date.
he was born in March of 1941.
Right. So we're looking at almost 10 months, right? From May
Yeah.
1940 when Belgium is
Belgium was invaded in May 10th of 1940.
yes, same
Yeah.
as
So
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's just interesting that after that many months they assimilated family. I'm not evaluating. I'm just saying,
No,
okay.
no, I know. I mean, I'm assuming they both in Poland were Orthodox Jews. I mean, they were raised religious.
So
Um,
right. It was just so.
they just did. I guess the religion, just their culture beat out their prudence.
And so what did they call him as a girl's name?
Honey, sweetie, there are for you there's a word, there was the term of endearment in French that they would call him. They never called him Jean-Pierre. They never said to him, like, this is what's incredible to me is they really, as he was getting older, and they really took care of his emotional health. They didn't say as he was getting older, now you're really a boy, but we call you a girl. It was just honey, sweetie. They didn't discuss it. When the war was over, they cut his hair and put him in short pants. And they didn't say anything like, you're a boy now, but you were a girl. They just, and if you met Harry, he is the most well-adjusted human being. His emotional well-being before and after the war, which after the war rocked his world, and we can get into that. His emotional well-being was really taken care of, which was not, it was not common in that time period, war or no war, just wasn't common.
Okay, so now let's get to what happened to his parents. And wait, when his father took the name Charles, did he have false identity cards that said he was not Jewish?
They had to register with the government. That was one of the Nazi, they started the Nazi anti-racial
Right.
policies. And one of those was you had to register with the government and you had to have an identity card stamped in red that said Juif,
I
Juif.
am. Right.
And
French.
I've seen those identity cards of theirs and they were stamped. They didn't wear the yellow star. When that one came out, they refused. They didn't do it. But they did have to get, they did get their identity cards stamped.
Okay, so now they're in the resistance, and what are they doing? Their baby is safe.
Their baby is safe. They are handing out anti-Nazi pamphlets. Belgium had a very, very strong resistance. They were not an anti-Semitic country like Poland was. I wouldn't say they cared for their Jews greatly, but they were uncomfortable by what was happening, especially when the Jews were told to wear the yellow star. To them,
Now, do you know when that was? Because in different countries, look, she has notes to remember. I'm teasing, but do you remember when they had?
yes, it was May of 1942 when they had to wear the yellow star. And
So
that,
now
and
the
go ahead.
Germans have been there for 2 years, almost to the day, and that's
Yes,
when they asked.
yes.
Okay, not
I
asked.
mean, the Germans, first of all, they didn't want the public against them. So it was a very slow, insidious process. And the Belgians were very gun shy of the Germans coming in because of the atrocities that the Germans had committed during World War One. They had
That
been,
okay, that was my point. That
yes,
whereas the Netherlands did not realize the true nature of the Germans. The Belgians had already experienced it.
yes, yes. So they were the Nazis knowing that, this is all very smart on their part. They came in, they were relatively humane. It took a while. It was very gradual. And the first anti-Jewish policies didn't affect the typical Belgian population. It was things like no kosher slaughtering. Well, if you're not
Mm.
Jewish, that doesn't affect you. And you don't even really notice it. It's not your world. So it was very slow. Government jobs were taken away. You couldn't, for Jews, you couldn't teach, you couldn't be a journalist, you couldn't be a lawyer. But then again, it just opened up the job market for non-Jewish Belgium. So again, it wasn't like, oh, what are you doing to our country's Jewish population? Then they had to have these ID cards where they're identified as Jews on their ID cards. Didn't affect the non-Jewish population. But as the noose started to tighten, it did start to affect them. There were curfews. It was a worse curfew for Jews than non-Jews, but there were curfews. You couldn't be on the street past a certain time. Um, and then they were told their food was rationed. Everybody's food was rationed, Gentile and Jews alike. And then they were told they had to share their rations with the German army. And they were not happy. And there had been a resistance initially, but it really flourished. And Belgium had at one time, I believe something like 567 separate anti-Nazi publications going out. And it's not a huge country.
I know.
So there was a very robust resistance. And as Jews, Charles and Rosa felt very strongly that they needed to be a part of it, especially because they had a child and they wanted a better world for their child. And another thing that Harry told me was that his parents were arrested separately while they were handing out these publications. I don't believe that's true. And that his mother and father never saw each other again once they were arrested. I know that's not true. And we can get to that, as we continue
Okay,
into.
okay, wait. There's Did the Jews at this point get the same? They were not in ghettos, right? They were still living in their own apartments. Did they get the same rations as the non-Jews?
That is a really good question. I don't know. I must not have come across that in my research.
Okay, I just was curious.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're up to May 42, right? And now but they didn't wear, and the penalty for not wearing your yellow star was what?
They would arrest you. And,
Who
once the
knows from there?
deportation started,
Yeah, so when did
or
the
maybe
de
they just shoot you because they could do whatever they wanted.
so when did the deportations of Belgian Jews start?
Okay, the first deportation went out. Of course, I'm looking at my sheet. Um, August 4th, 1942.
Okay.
So,
So
3 months after they had to wear the yellow star.
okay, so let's just kind of again, I love putting this in situ. So
Yes.
the Wannsee Conference for the final solution was January 20th, 1942.
Hmm.
Auschwitz starts getting, I mean, it was already a prisoner camp, etc., but gets geared up when
Hmm.
this young woman from Bratislava, etc., was sent in March of 42. So now in the summer of 42, these deportations are beginning from Western Europe, are
Right.
really beginning to start.
They're ramping up. Yes.
Yeah,
And so a transit camp had to be uh, made, found from, some existing place in
right.
Belgium. And so there was an old army barracks called the Dawson Barracks, Dossin. And the word for barracks is Kaserne. And so it was called Kaserne Dawson or Dawson Kaserne, but it was between Antwerp and Brussels in a town in Flemish called Mechelen and in French called Malines. So I'm just going to refer to it as Malines because it's much easier to say. But
Wait,
it had,
I have to tell you why I laughed. Because when she said the word Caserna, so my husband and I were stationed with the U.S. Army in Munich from September 70th to September 1970 to May 1972. And we were at McGraw Caserne or Caserna. So
oh
I
yeah,
just laughed
yep,
when she
yeah,
said, I couldn't help
yeah,
it, the barracks,
yeah.
right?
Yes, yes. So that barracks was perfect to be a transit camp from which every arrested Jew in Belgium would go on, would be deported because it had a courtyard inside where nobody could see out front, outside, nobody could see what was going on inside, and the prisoners couldn't see what was going on outside. So literally every Jew in Belgium that was arrested went through this transit camp called Malines. Um, and the first transport went out, like I told you, August 4th of 1942. And the Nazis first, they sent letters out to, oh gosh, 12,000 people, something like that. They wanted 1,000. They were hoping for 1,000. They knew people, they weren't going to send a transport out without 1,000 because of course it had to had to be cost efficient. And they
Right,
didn't want to send this train,
right.
this group of trains out unless they had 1,000 Jews. They got 999. Some people went, believing that they were going for labor. The rest had to be caught, arrested.
Okay, now wait. Now I'm confused. Right now they're still in their apartments. These first, they're not already in the
There
transit
was,
camp.
they had to be arrested and brought to the transit camp.
Right. So that's what I'm saying when they got these notes. Okay. And what
Yes,
did the
some people
notices say? Did they just said show up at
show up for labor, bring pair of strong boots, bring 2 weeks worth of non-perishable food. You're going to work, that kind of thing. Um, the Belgian Jews were not as wary as the Jews who had come from other countries, like Charles and Rosa. They were from Poland. They were used to anti-Semitism. They didn't trust anything a German was saying. But the Belgian Jews were only 6% of the Jewish population of Belgium at that time. That was a very small number. Most of them were people who were fleeing Germany, fleeing Poland, just looking to get away from all the anti-Semitism. So 94% of the Jewish population was very wary, did not really believe this letter. So I think 300 people showed up maybe of their own volition, and they wanted 700 more. And they did get 999 people for that first transport, which was third class. It was a third class windowed train car, regular, not the cattle cars. That happened later because so many people were trying to escape. And of those 999 people, nine survived. So that group was decimated. I mean, most of the groups were decimated. There were 30 transports from
And
beginning.
they went directly, all went to Auschwitz, or they went to other places?
Most of them went to Auschwitz. A couple of them went to other camps. But that wasn't until towards the end of the war when they were going to camps in Germany.
Oh, yes, because exactly. Because as the Russians advanced on the Eastern Front, Jews were
Right,
pulled back from the concentration camps in January of 45 when Auschwitz was liberated. Then the death marches, yes, they pulled them back into Germany.
right.
Now, I started to read years ago, and I don't think I ever finished the 20th train.
Yes. I used
Now,
that in my book for my research. So
so
really impressed that you know about that.
yeah, so were Charles and Rosa involved in with that?
No. Um, So this you wanted to know specifically your podcast, what I didn't know about the Holocaust and Belgium, like I had said to you, it's not a country you read a lot of books about. When
I know.
they're writing their memoirs and things, most of them were from Poland or Eastern Europe. There were two things that occurred in Belgium that didn't occur anywhere else that you would think would have had more press by now. And it's something I, as a researcher, didn't know until I started researching Belgium. And that is so transports, there were 30 transports from beginning to end that went out of Malines. Charles and Rosa, once they were arrested, went out on transport 24. But it wasn't numbers 1 through 30. They had like transport Z, transport 23 dash, 2. But so it equaled 30 transports. The last numerical transport was 25, but there were 30. And again, it's because not all of them went to Auschwitz. Some of them went to other places. Transport 22, XX, because they used Roman numerals. There was a Jewish medical student, and he just, he had to do something. And he got two of his non-Jewish friends, so just three guys, organized a very simple plan that they would take a lantern and they would cover it in red paper and they would stand on the tracks, hold up the lantern so that the operator of the train would stop, would be alerted and would stop. And it could have meant to the train operator anything like there's an accident or there's some debris on the track, but it alerted him to stop. And the only tools amongst the three men that they had were one pistol and a pair of pliers. And only one person of the three had the pistol and the pliers. So he was able to open up one train car. And now there's SS on these trains and they're starting to shoot.
Now,
But
wait, you know what? I don't remember from the brief. Now, was this cattle cars by now? I think,
by transport 20, I do have when they started using the cattle cars in my notes. I believe, yes, it was cattle cars. Yes. Yes,
okay,
because they
that's what I envisioned. And now, when are we, what's the point in history that we're talking about
okay.
this?
So Transport 20 happened on April 19th, 1943. So it's less than a year,
Wait, April 19th?
1943.
So just to give people a world vision, this
Yeah.
is the same time as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising,
Yeah.
almost to the day, I think. Again, I don't have any notes in front of me, but
Right.
the way my mind works, because in this show, I try and connect the dots.
Right.
So the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is happening in Poland. And here,
Hmm.
this 20th train was literally stopped by three men.
Three men with very little tools to carry it out. So I believe it was Robert, one of the guys, the one that had the pliers. He was able to get the car open. And of that act, people, he was like, get out, hurry, hurry, hurry. But there were other people on other cars who had been in the transit camp and kind of like were able to like find a knife or a file who were already making holes in their own cars, unbeknownst to the plan that was going to happen. It just gave them luck because the train stopped and they weren't, killed from jumping. whatever. So people were able to escape from other cars besides the one that was opened. The SS was shooting, and so on this transport were over 1,600 Jews in 30 cars. 236 people fled. 26 were shot by the SS. 80 to 90 of them were recaptured, and 120 succeeded in escaping successfully.
And then they went
Including
into hiding,
seven,
I bet.
yes, they were hid by Belgian families, most of them. And 17 of those 120 were from the car that was plied open. So that's a success.
And what about the three men who
They
staged the
were
rest?
they were all arrested. I can't. They were arrested. Two survived. The other two were sent to camps. I think one was shot, later. But that is the only instance in the entire war, in every country that was sending transports, where somebody intervened to try to stop a Nazi transport. The only time. And then another thing about Belgium that sets it apart from every other country was that there was a royal family, and all the countries had, these Jewish associations, which really were only put together to help the Nazis. That they thought they were doing good, but they really were basically conduits for the Nazis to make things more efficient. And Belgium had one of these too, the Association of Belgian Jews. And this association went to the royal family. They went to the Queen Mother, the mother of the king. Her name was Elizabeth, and begged her to do something, to intervene. And through the
Wait, now,
Italian,
had she fled to England like the Dutch royal family, or was she
no,
still
they
in
were
Belgium?
there. They were there. They met with her in person.
So that's right. That's already another thing that they stayed in Belgium, right?
Yes, I believe Leopold. See, these kinds of things are not in my
Okay.
long-term
Okay.
memory.
You know what?
I believe he was under arrest, but comfortable arrest, I believe,
But
Leopold.
the Queen Mother was there.
She was an old lady. They didn't deal with her. I think that she was there. They went to her and begged her to do something on behalf of the Jews. And so she got in touch with the Italian royal family. I guess maybe she had a relationship with them, and somehow got through the Italian royal family a message to Hitler to back off the Belgian Jews. But she said she would only help the Belgian Jews that were Belgian.
That were
Again,
Belgian.
6% of the population.
Right.
And she did succeed in having 300
Wait,
people who, go ahead. You have a
so when
question?
is this? Kind of tell us again, when is this?
They met with her August 1st, 1942.
Before the first transport.
Right before,
Right before.
three
Okay, I
days
just
before, 3 days before. But again, people are being arrested. Like they're
exactly.
preparing for the transport. So this
So
is right when people are starting to be snatched off the streets, the letters going out, things like that. So they know what's going
that's what
on.
I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah, they know what's going on.
So go ahead. I interrupt. I didn't, but
No, that's okay. That's okay.
so
She was
the,
successful in having 300 Belgian Jews released from Malines.
and then were they picked up again or were they left?
Yes, of course. By September of 1943, the Nazis reneged on their promise, and everybody was, yeah,
Right.
yes, they reneged on. Of course they did. Of course they did. But she was also successful in getting some. They were about to arrest all these children that were in an orphanage, and they were orphaned because their parents had already been deported, and she got them to back off doing that for the time being. But it's the only time a royal family in Europe intervened. Both Belgium. I mean, it's they didn't have the blatant anti-Semitism that a lot of countries had.
Right. Okay, I'm probably going to get these numbers wrong, but what I don't understand is, okay, that the Dutch population, Jewish population was decimated by only 85%, but no, excuse me, switch it around. The Belgian Jewish population was only decimated by 40%, but 85% in Holland. And Holland had the highest percentage of Jews that were murdered, killed, starved, etc. And those two countries are like right next to each other. I had this little chart. I
Mhm.
really have a map in my living room. It's four and above with all the European things to try and help me keep this straight. What
Mhm.
was the difference, do you think, between the Dutch and the Belgian?
I don't know. I mean, were the Netherlands more, you know what? I can't speak. I'm not educated. I
No,
haven't
no,
done
no.
a
I know. I'm
project
just saying.
about the Netherlands. Maybe it was easier to be helpful because Belgium was smaller, a smaller country.
I just
Um,
think it's fascinating
yeah.
that
Yep.
what we always think, oh, they're right next to each other. What's the difference? But the Belgians were not. I mean, it's amazing. I just don't quite get it. I mean, I'm thrilled that they.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. I mean, I would have to do research on that.
Okay, it's just these are the kinds of questions that when I look
I
at it, I go,
know.
what
I
makes
know.
one
You
country
learn about one thing and it's great about answering one question, but it always opens up other questions. And every time when I was writing this book, when I was researching this book, I should say, every time I learned something, it would just fuel another question that
exactly?
I would try to have to solve. And on a side note, when when I had exhausted every research avenue that I could, I reached out to a Jewish genealogist. Um, and that's where I got 300 pages of records for that's when I got the wedding certificate and found out exactly when and where Harry's parents had been married, which was huge. That's when I got, because they had to constantly, Rosa and Charles had to register with the government, not only because before the war, because they were not Belgian, but at every time they moved and every 6 months, and then as Jews, there was so much paperwork about them and pictures taken every time they came in. So I was able to give Harry 300 pages of his parents, photographs he'd never seen of his father. I saw those cards with Juif stamped on on them, big red. I mean, they weren't red to me, they were black and white, but
Right.
big,
No. Okay.
big. Every address change, where they were employed, things like that. So,
Fast.
but what I'm saying is you can't you can imagine the millions and millions of pages that the Nazis destroyed, but there are still 30 million pages of documentation that we have. 30 million pages that survived.
Now, and are those pages? There was a place in Germany that had those pages that were
The
Brett. Yeah.
Arelson Archive, and they're still working on digitizing all of those. So you could go on one week, not find what you're looking for, and literally go on another week, and it's there.
Right. And
And
it
we have
was,
a bunch of volunteers working, helping them digitize everything.
and those files weren't even open for researchers for decades, as I
Decades.
recall.
Between one book that I've written and the third book, so much more is available.
Fascinating.
It's
Okay.
fascinating.
Okay.
It's
So
but you will never like you need to go in like if you do this kind of work or you're trying to research your family, you need to go in knowing there's a large chance you won't find much or even anything. It's luck. It's just luck.
and it's also knowing at what point in what, okay, get into my lecture about and trying to deal with Holocaust deniers and distorters.
Uh,
So I'll just say after I wrote this nonfiction Holocaust play, Thin Edge of the Wedge, and people started to read it or whatever, they would literally write me and say, oh no, you have Ruth Kluger wrong. She wasn't born in Romania, she was born in. No, there were two important Ruth Klugers. So then I kept having to, and then someone would write me and say, no, she couldn't have gotten a tattoo in Stutthof. It was only in Auschwitz. Then I would do research. No. So you have to know, I always say to people, you have to know exactly when you're looking.
mhm,
Uh, even if all the material is available, you
mhm.
cannot um, generalize that this is what Auschwitz was like because there were special groups like the Gypsies, Roman
Right,
Sinti, but they were called Gypsies at the
right,
time,
right.
who
Yep.
came in, who got to wear their clothes. I mean, until they were murdered.
Right.
You know,
And there's a difference with so Rosa and Charles,
yes,
unbeknownst to Harry, who told me his father, because he was Catholic, was never in a concentration camp. He was sent to a POW camp and shot by a firing squad. Of course, that's not true. His parents were arrested together and they went out on the same transport because that day that I went to the Holocaust Museum and the researcher there handed me the book, I saw the transit list for their deportation and transport 24. And he was number 234 and she was number 235. So of course they were with each other when they were arrested. Of course they saw each other. They were lined up according to number. They saw each other the 1 hour a day they were allowed to, walk in the courtyard of the transit camp. They know they knew what was happening to each other. They were together. I'm sure they were together on the cattle car, and it was a cattle car for them by the time they went out. Um, Rosa was tattooed. She was 76700. Charles, which really made it quite hard to do research on him, even though I had his correct name and everything, he was not tattooed. He instead was quarantined for 3 weeks with another group, and then he was sent out to a labor camp that which they would call like Auschwitz 3, and had an extensive network of labor camps that were, a dotted line to Auschwitz. So without having that number, it was a little bit harder to find information on him, though I did. I found everything I needed to find. Um, so very differing uh, methodologies for the two of them. Um, Rosa, unfortunately, was subjected to a medical experiment where she was sterilized. So thank God she had a child before the war. What a gift. Um, what a gift that she survived the medical experiments. She was in what's called Block 10, which was the medical experiment block. Um, I go into great detail in the book about what was happening to her. There were about 900 to 1,000 people that were subjected to what she was subjected to. Um, then she eventually, for the most part, you're going to be in more than one camp if you survive. If you survive Auschwitz, the chance of you being sent somewhere else for labor is pretty high, and that happened to both of them. Charles was in many, many more camps than Rosa was in. One of the labor camps that Rosa was in had better conditions. Charles had it horribly, horrible conditions in every place where he was. He really suffered. I mean, everybody suffered. He really suffered. She suffered too, obviously, but she survived. And as well, she was able to be reunited with her sister, who had gone out on an earlier transport. And the fact that they had each other, and it's true for many, many survivors, if they had a family member or a close friend with them, their chances of survival were much higher.
Yes, I have read that and know it from people I've interviewed. So that was very fortuitous, whatever the word is. So
Yeah,
now so when did Charles die? Because he didn't make it to the end of the war, right?
he did not. It's heartbreaking because he died days before he would have been liberated, and he didn't die. He was murdered. He was shot. Um, he was shot in a group, and I think that's where the PO, firing squad story that Rosa made up for Harry kind of comes from. There were 50 people at the end. He was in Germany. He was at a labor camp in Hanover, Germany. They were going to be marching on, trying to run away from the Russians. There were 50 people who were told if you're not feeling well, it ended up being 50 people. They were told if you're not feeling well, uh, a truck will come for you and you don't have to march. Meanwhile, the days before, they'd had men digging a big pit. Not a good sign. I'm assuming that Charles was in pretty bad shape because
Mhm.
he was one of those 50 men. And they were all murdered. The transport went out, the 50 people remained. Then somebody came back. Two people came back. I believe it was, the head of the camp, who was a really sadistic sadistic guy named Walter Quakernack, and he was hanged after the war for war crimes. He and his henchmen murdered everybody that was there. However, one of the people was hiding in a chimney shaft, and he gave testimony after the war.
Right.
And I think that that's where Rosa got the story of, this mass shooting.
Mm.
And that's where she got her story. She changed it to POW camp to align with the fact that the father was Catholic, Catholic. I believe, and I write in the book for Harry, and he agreed with me. We worked together. How do you feel about this? Do you think this is why your mother might have taken
Right.
this secret to her grave? And it certainly aligns with what's happening in our country right now, which I call the Nazi playbook, because I just feel like, I'm not saying we're going to have a Holocaust here, but there's a lot of propaganda and there are a lot of things that are happening that align with that copy things that were happening in 1930s Germany. And I live in DC. And one thing that happened is the Kennedy Center was taken over, and Trump is the head of the Kennedy Center. And I was supposed to see a play about a classroom. It takes place in a school, and it's a progressive school, and they yanked it. And I got my money back, thank goodness. But they yanked it because it doesn't align with,
What
you know,
what's the name of the play?
called Eureka Now.
Yeah, okay.
But
We don't
that's
usually,
propaganda. We're getting off tour, but we're
yeah,
not,
but
because that's propaganda. And so I believe that Rosa believed if a Holocaust can happen this happened. She lived it. It happened. What's to stop it from happening again sometime in the future? I believe that Rosa thought her son was safer if he truly believed that he was half Catholic. And I believe that's why she took that secret to her grave. His father wasn't alive. So he's not going to be like, well, what? Here I am. I'm a Jew. Like he wasn't there. He died. So she could keep this as her truth. And all I'm saying is, I never believed the things that are happening in my country could happen. And they're pretty small compared to like a Holocaust, obviously, but it's crazy and it's happening. So, and I know
yeah,
too much.
yeah, I'm doing a lot of research on the 1930s lead up. My feeling about Holocaust education is starting with the Holocaust is way too late. You
Yes,
need, and I believe in Daniel Mendelsohn, who wrote The Lost, his statement about that from World War I through World War II is the second 30 years war in Europe. And and of course he's right because he's a genius. But besides that,
I
um,
read I read that book too.
yeah, uh, the more research I do, in fact, you reminded me of something. I'll tell you offline, something I have to add. So I've written several chapters, and now every time something, oh no, I have to go back and add that. So yes, I see the parallels very well, but we're not talking about that. What I do want to do with as we wrap up is so Rosa survived. Where was she? Where was she liberated? When was she liberated?
So she was eventually, her third camp was a labor camp in Germany, because they were moving everybody
Yeah,
west.
right,
It's called Assersleben. And they were making anti-aircraft parts, like to gun down
right.
planes. Um, they were marched out. Well, first of all, the factory was bombed by the Allies, so there was no factory left. And
Do you know what part of Germany this is?
Assersleben, the town is called, I believe, Assersleben.
Okay,
And
okay, keep going. I just like
I
to
didn't put it
visually.
in my cheat sheet. It's in the book. So they were marched out, and the war ended while they were marching. They were sleeping in a barn. They had gotten permission from the mayor of the town they were in at the time. It was nighttime. Can we sleep in the barn? He gave them permission. When they woke up in the morning, the mayor came in and said, "You're free. The war's over." And of course, all the SS had fled, and they they could either walk to the Russian area or the American area. They chose the Russian area, I think, because they could communicate more easily Polish to Russian than Polish to English, even though it was a little bit further for them to walk, she and her sister. And then she spent some time in some hospitals, eventually got her way back to Belgium in August of 45. And that was the day that she returned. Harry was over 4 years old, And he said that was the worst day of his life because he knew nothing. He was very happy with his parents, very loved and felt very secure. He had been moved out to a farm in the country that was owned by a family member because somebody who lived too close to his war parents had started dating someone in the SS, and it was too close for comfort. And so they moved him out to the country. So he was very much shielded from the fact that there was a war. Being on a farm, he had plenty to eat. He had cousins to play with. He was back in Brussels, back with his parents full time. They would visit him on weekends. And one night, his parents,
His
you know,
mother.
his war parents sat him down and said, "We have something to tell you. We're not your real parents. We took care of you during the war. You have a real mommy, and she's coming tomorrow to meet you." I mean, can you imagine what that must be like for a 4.5-year-old? Um, and she did. She came the next day, and she brought his favorite chocolates. They had prepared Rosa. And again, back to this whole emotional well-being. It wasn't like, well, here's your mom, bye. It was very gradual. Her reinsertion into his life, or I should say, insertion into his life. I mean, he was 6 weeks old. Um, First, it was gradual. Then they'd have dinners together. Then he went and lived with her. But the DeCranes would pick him up from school every Wednesday and bring him home. And he would sleep over on like every other weekend and things like that. And gradually, he grew to love his mother as much as he loved the DeCranes. And they were a part of his life for the rest of their lives. He did come to the States when he was in middle school. He spent every summer with the DeCranes. They were a very important part of his life. And his
That's
mother could have been very jealous and said, you know what, he's mine now. You had him for 4 years. I don't want him too close to you. They were amazing people, the three of them, in handling his emotional well-being. And she did remarry. Rosa remarried another survivor who was like 9 years younger than she was. And he adopted Harry, and Harry carries his last name. And his war story, his Holocaust trajectory is also in the book. At the end, it's its own, bunch of chapters, what he went through.
was he a Polish Jew or was he
He
a
was a Polish Jew. I don't know how, but he recognized Rosa. There was a cafe that she used to go to where a lot of Jews who were in the Bund, which was like a Jewish
right?
political organization after the war, would gather. He was a waiter there. She would go and she would bring Harry. They would give him dessert and make a fuss over him. And he loved this guy. And he claimed to recognize Rosa. Now, I don't know how he would have, like from the old country, like from Poland. They weren't from the same town. Um, they were like 10 miles away from each other, but that's a lot in shtetl life. And he was 9 years younger. So I don't know how he would have, maybe she reminded him of someone from Poland. And he just took a liking to her. He made sure he was always her waiter. They struck up a relationship. They were ahead of their time. They lived together before they
What?
got married. Harry was besotted with Max. Max had lost his entire family, was besotted with Harry, and they did get married, and Harry was adopted by him, which was lovely that Harry was able to grow up in a two-parent family.
Yes. But one whose father also understood the trauma.
Yes,
And
absolutely. And they needed Harry. I mean, Harry was such a bright light in their lives. Um, and Rose's sister had lost her entire first family and did remarry and have a child. But this is a mystery. I'm like I told you, everything you learn, you also get a mystery with it.
but
When I was doing research, Harry's aunt, Celia, her children, who were teenagers, went out on transport too. So I don't know if they were arrested on the streets or if they answered the summons to come. And there's no record of them. They were
not
not,
even in the transport list.
oh, yes, I'm sorry. Once they
They
got to
are on the,
Auschwitz, they
yeah.
disappeared. I don't know if they were laborers and then died. I don't know, no numbers for them. I don't know if they were transferred and then died. They disappeared without a trace. There is nothing that can be found for them.
And Celia wasn't on the same transport. So she does.
Celia went out on transport 22, I believe. She went out a few months before. She went out, I think, in January, and then Rosa went out in April. Yeah. But she lost her husband and her children. And yet, rebuilt, got remarried, and had another child. And Rosa lost her husband. And the thing about losing Charles, number one, they were very much in love. Number two, she looked for him. She went to the agency where, she put in the
Right.
paperwork and it came back stamped, unsolved.
That's interesting.
And I've written to the camp where he was murdered, from all the research that I've done, uh, it points to him having been murdered by either Quaker Knack or his crony. Um, but I got a very poignant letter on him past the day the transport came in, and that was in February of 45. Um, but that with that mass shooting, it it points to that, as well as some testimony that I found from somebody else talking about a Belgian um, who had suffered, and that could have been Charles. But um, yeah, I mean, that's what the evidence points towards. But honestly, just within days of what would have been, his liberation, and it's just heartbreaking.
Not quite as heartbreaking is the people who were liberated and ate too much rich food and died of
Right.
that.
And
That,
died.
whenever I think of that, and I saw a play years ago in which that was just a small portion, but the
Mhm.
doctor, the American medic, who thought he was doing good by giving them this food
Yes.
that killed them,
Yeah.
he never got over the trauma. So, anyway, we have
There's a
talked
whole,
about a
by the
lot
way,
of trauma.
there's a whole section in my book about Bergen-Belsen and what happened when it was liberated and the food situation because Rosa and Celia spent time in Bergen-Belsen. So I'm a former teacher and a former librarian, so I can't write this book and just write about
Hold it up so everyone can see the cover.
Rosa and Charles.
We seem to be having some technical issues and we've gone way over the time I usually allot. So I'm going to
I
thank
write
Robin.
as if the reader know background information. So there's some reason. Yeah, you are.
So I'm going to thank Robin and I thank the listeners. And as I end every show, I say, may the memory of victims of the Holocaust and those who tried to save them be a blessing forever.